Okay, so here we are in our fourth week, and we have endured a hurricane already and transferring over to Canvas. So thanks to all of you for bearing with me through this little hairy transition from Blackboard over to Canvas. But I hope you're enjoying the class so far in your modules and the materials that you see on each module. So to recap where we are so far, at first, you had a module that was the orientation, went over the syllabus, and your LibGuide that I created for this class. So how much did you spend for the book for this class? Zero. So the LibGuide was created by me and the fabulous librarians. We did a lot of research to make that available for you, and it gives biographical information of our SPAINters on our timeline and the different paintings that we'll be looking at, one for each painter, although I have other paintings by our SPAINters in the LibGuide as well. So that's in your first module. Then after that, you have a module for each of our artists and paintings, which of course I call SPAINtings because they reside in Spain, and 8 of the 10 SPAINters are Spaniards. The other 2, which happen to be our first 2 painters, are from somewhere else, but their paintings reside in Spain, and the paintings belong to Spain. And in the case of El Greco, he actually lived his entire adult life in Spain and immigrated to Spain via Italy from Greece. So where are you? Are you aware of the critical thinking questions that you ought to think about in this class? Remember, as I said on our announcements yesterday, it's really important that you kind of grasp the context, all right? So I've created a timeline, and we know the context where our timeline begins. So the backstory is that 700 years prior to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand cooking up their little idea of trying to conquer the entire world by aligning themselves with the Catholic Church and creating the Spanish Inquisition. Prior to that, there was more than 700 years of relatively peaceful rule by the Moors. So it's important that you know, who are the Moors? The Moors were the North African Muslims, and they ruled Spain for more than 700 years in relative peace. When Queen Isabella and King Philip got together, or King Ferdinand, excuse me, got together and decided that they not only wanted the entire old world, they wanted the entire new world also. And they decided by aligning themselves with the one true church and cleansing Spain of heretics. So you should have seen in the documentary, the History Channel documentary from your first module, an hour and a half all about the components about the Spanish Inquisition. But what I want you to remember as you review the materials, as you look at the SPAINters and the SPAINtings, I want you to remember that this is a humanities class. So unlike an art history class or a history class, you won't be memorizing a timeline and dates and names. We'll skip roughly 100 years between the paintings that I've selected and the artists. But I want you to always keep in mind my critical thinking questions, as well as the relationship between the artist and the royals, the artist and himself or herself, and the artist and the Catholic Church. Okay, so far we've had 2 devout Catholics that were the painters. We are now in the Habsburg line, and will remain with the Habsburgs for quite some time. All right. So King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella they were the architects of the Spanish Inquisition in the 15th century. We're now in the 16th century with El Greco, and we Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand had a daughter, Juana la Loca. Very interesting story that you might want to pursue later for your final projects. Unfortunately, we're skipping over 2 generations, but Juana la Loca was the daughter of King Philip. I keep saying that. King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. She married Philip el Hermoso, Philip the Handsome, and he was a Habsburg. So their children became part of the Habsburg line. And the Spanish Inquisition is still alive and well with El Greco. The Spanish Inquisition will still be alive and well with our next painting, which is my favorite. And I don't want to start talking about that yet. And all the way through to Goya, our 4th painter. So the Spanish Inquisition hangs out for, a few hundred years. So I want to talk about that. And that's something that you want to keep in mind as you're examining history. But we have to eventually transcend the specifics of Spain, the specifics of the Catholic Church and the rhetoric, the specifics of the Spanish Inquisition, and begin to make connections, because humanities is the study of culture. So my hope for you is that the language of the class is to examine culture and people through the events and through the eyes of these painters and artists. What story are they paid to tell? What is the context? What is the landscape in which they are painting these paintings? So what story is being told? Really, it's painted, right? What story are they commissioned to tell or paint? Do they have multiple stories within the painting? We saw a lot with Hieronymus Bosch that was personal, that he's believed to have put in there. An autorretrato is a self-portrait. I call it a 15th century selfie in the case of Hieronymus Bosch, or the Spanish sometimes call him El Bosco. Okay, and we see again that El Greco in the burial of Count Orgaz, he painted himself in the painting. Did the Catholic Church tell him to do that? The people that commissioned that painting? Did they say, hey, put yourself in there? What about little Jorge? You learned from your brief 7-minute video about burial of Count Orgaz that El Greco decided to put his illegitimate kid in the painting. He put some of his friends in the painting. He put King Philip II, the grandson of Juana la Loca and Philip el Hermoso, who's a Habsburg and an art collector, king of Spain, for whom El Greco was hoping to get a job, from whom El Greco was hoping to get a job. So what did El Greco do? What was his little business card? Pretty elaborate one. How did he let King Philip know, hey, I admire you, and I'm going out on a limb here? So El Greco had some stories from within a story. What is the legend of Count Orgaz? And why was El Greco commissioned to paint that legend? That legend was from almost 300 years before El Greco was even born in Greece. What was the message, and what was the different messages between El Bosco's message, Hieronymus Bosch's message about Catholicism? He was part of a brotherhood of Our Lady, and it was a pretty heavy-duty Catholic elite brotherhood that he belonged to. So he was a pious, devout Catholic. And yet, take a look at that painting. We talked about the 7 deadly sins. You read a little bit about the 7 deadly sins, the triptych of the painting. What did the first panel represent? The second panel, the central panel. And then the third panel, in which historians believe that large face is Hieronymus Bosch himself, an autorretrato again, painting himself in hell. Why? So you should be beginning to put together some of the, connecting the dots on your own. Looking for ways to compare and contrast, we had in the beginning of our study, and still El Greco is living in Toledo, which was the former capital of Spain, before King Philip II decided to move it to Madrid. And that was also the place where the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians lived in relative peace in Toledo. And that's why there's a symbol of the crescent of Islam, the Star of David, and the crucifix that represents the city of Toledo. So a lot of the architecture in Toledo is still Moorish architecture, even though it's a cathedral. It used to be a mosque. So there's a lot of thumbprints and idiosyncrasies that you can find from within the villages and the towns and the landscape of Spain even today. What is the definition of heretics according to the Spanish Inquisition? So I want you to think about all of these things as you keep moving forward on our timeline, and you start to ask yourself these questions. What story is being told? Who's telling the story? And whose story is it? Are there layers of stories? The other guiding quote that I want you to think about is, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. What does that mean? I want you to think about that. That's a George Orwell quote from 1984. Have you ever considered what history is? Who got to decide whose stories we tell or paint, who we remember, who we bury? If you looked at many of the paintings from these two periods of time that we've studied so far, the 15th and the 16th century, you might think there were nothing but a lot of really white men roaming around and a couple of women who were queens. There weren't cameras, social media. So who got to decide? Who got their portraits painted? What happened to the stories of the people that lived who didn't get their portraits painted? So I want you to think about culture, the haves, the have-nots, class, power, and the power over these artists and their ability to tell the truth through their work. And if they are telling stories, I want you to go out on a limb and try to figure out what they're trying to say. I hope you're enjoying this so far. As you go into each module, and you're welcome to go ahead a little bit if you want to, you certainly should always follow along in the LibGuide. There are going to be extra links, extra things in the LibGuide that aren't included. This is an online class. I teach it face-to-face. You're welcome to come. Reach out to me and let me know if you'd like to do that. You're welcome anytime. Right now, they're neck and neck with exactly what you're studying. This class relies a lot on discussion, so the discussion board has to take the place of what we would say in class, and it makes it a lot harder. So I'd ask you to please try to raise the bar and not regurgitate what you think I want to hear or what I say, and instead go out on a limb, take some risks, know your stuff, all right? Have a thesis. A thesis is a point. As we move forward, you're going to be charged with researching on your own, on the database. You're going to be charged with connecting the past to the present, connecting home and abroad, starting to make these connections. And what does it say about our culture today? What can you find in today's world that might be similar or different to what was going on then? It's easy to say, wow, these people were barbaric, this is insane. But we're going to see with the Spanish Inquisition, it kind of last, wane, revive, wane again, and revive again. You're not going to believe it. And some of the language might sound very similar to what you might hear on CNN in the world today. So I'd like you to start thinking about those kinds of things. That's what a humanities class is. Your critical thinking questions and your guiding quote, really important. thinking about the Catholic Church, and for example, if you did some research or if you know anything about Catholicism, you know that confession is a really important sacrament in Catholicism. So you have baptism, you have communion or the Eucharist, you have confession, or it's called reconciliation, you've got confirmation, marriage or holy orders if you're going to become a priest, and your last rites, which means that you can be kind of a jerk or even worse your whole entire life. And on your deathbed, if you confess your sins to a priest, that priest can actually, that's pretty cool. I mean, you could be a jerk, rip people off your whole life, according to the Catholic Church, and you can be forgiven for those sins. By contrast, you're born with original sin. If for some reason you're a baby and you die, as many babies often did, women often died in childbirth too back then, before you're baptized, you might end up in purgatory for a while because you're born with original sin. So if you don't have that sin cleansed, so there's a lot of things. But the confession part, I think, is really interesting because that might hold some of the keys to why El Greco, in the landscape of the Inquisition, the same with Hieronymus Bosch, were willing to paint themselves the way they did in the painting. In El Greco's case, he admitted he had an illegitimate kid right in that painting that is in a church as we speak. I was in Toledo last summer and I got to go into the Church of Santo Tome and see the burial of Count Orgaz. And there's little Jorge right there. And if you wonder who he is, it's got his handkerchief with his birth date on it. Why would El Greco, a devout Catholic, painting something that was going to hang hundreds of years in a church, paint his illegitimate kid? That's an interesting question. Why would Hieronymus Bosch paint himself in hell? He's the largest figure in the painting. Why? Weren't they scared? What was a heretic, and what could a heretic do according to the Catholic Church? What was an auto de fe? Was there any possibility to save your soul if you were a heretic according to the Catholic Church? So these are the questions that I want you to think about, and hopefully you'll start connecting the dots. I hope you enjoy these paintings. There's a lot of stories. Any one of these paintings we could spend the entire semester on. So I hope you enjoy it. Reach out if you need me. I'll try to do these more. I have a new computer now, so I'm able to send you some of these video discussions, and hopefully that'll help you out. But reach out. Do some thinking, try to liven up the discussion with really bringing something new to the discussion on discussion boards. You've got a quiz up next. The discussion board is up for El Greco. There's some thinking questions for you about compare and contrast. There's a page in that module that has some new terms to add to the terms you should already have gleaned from the study of the Spanish Inquisition. We are now on King Philip II with the Habsburgs, and he is paired with El Greco. So find out that relationship. Did it work out what El Greco wanted from him? Did he get it? And we will move on next week. But in the meantime, you have your quiz, you have a discussion board. The quiz should open on Thursday and remain open through Monday or Tuesday, whatever I told you in the announcement yesterday. And so the discussion board will remain open a week. All right? You got to post a thread before you can see what other people said. As soon as you do, you can see what other people said and respond to at least 2 people. I'd like you to stay away from language like, I really liked what you said. I'd rather you be more specific and really add something to the conversation. I get it that sometimes it's a little contrived when you're online. You can't think of anything to say, but I want you to make it count. I'd rather you say less and have it be precise and add something to the conversation, and really push yourselves to ask questions, the answers that you're given, and challenge each other to go deeper into this study. All right. Have a good night.